I just felt like it wasn't an environment that I felt a sense of belonging, and it just felt so far from home. And I don't think I
Mhm.
had ever been homesick before, but that was really the first time where I was like, I'm just in such a different environment.
Welcome to an episode of Be Queens. We interview Asian American women, CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs who built businesses from the ground up. We hope their ability to bring their vision to life inspires listeners to also realize their dreams, whether in business or elsewhere. Today, I'll be speaking with Amy Fan. Amy is the co-founder of 28 Health, a mission-driven digital health platform increasing women's health access for underserved communities, focused on inclusive care for BIPOC patients and individuals from low-income backgrounds. Previously, Amy worked at Onomie Beauty, a direct-to-consumer beauty startup, and at Bain Company as a consultant. She was recognized as Rock Health's Top 50 in Digital Health in 2021 and Inc.'s Female Founder 100 in 2022. Hi, Amy. Welcome to Be Queens.
Hi, Jonah. So stoked to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for coming on our podcast. So you and I know each other from business school.
Mhm.
I've obviously heard and kept track of your business growing throughout that phase because I know you started it in business school, but I'm really excited to dig into it in more detail and hear from yourself what that journey has been like.
Sounds good.
So before we dig into the entrepreneurship journey, I'd love to learn more about just your life story and how that influenced you in making some of the decisions that you've made later in life as you did embark on entrepreneurship. So in the first section, we'll focus a lot on your life story and the values and takeaways that you've had from those experiences. So let's start out with your childhood. How would you describe your childhood?
Yeah, for me, the immigrant experience is a really big part of my childhood. My family moved from Taiwan to Vancouver, British Columbia when I was 7 years old. And a big thing that has influenced me and why I'm in healthcare today is seeing the journey of my parents. When my parents first moved to Canada, they were in and out of hourly wage roles because unfortunately, a lot of their experiences and education they had in Taiwan didn't necessarily translate over in
Mm-hmm.
Canada. Luckily, one of the few things that we didn't have to worry about was access to a doctor because in Canada, there's universal healthcare. And regardless of your income, regardless of your job status, that's something that's always available to you.
Mm-hmm.
And the other element around being a child of immigrants is this idea of you're never too good to do something. I saw my dad, who had worked as an engineering manager in Taiwan, come to Canada and start working as a car washer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about being able to take a level of pride in the work that you do, the fact that it is hard work, regardless of what it is, and continue to remember that you can have really big dreams and simultaneously put in the hard work, regardless of what you think that level of work is.
Yeah. Seeing your parents go from an engineering manager and then take a blue collar job in Canada, I imagine that must have been hard for your family, but it sounds like you had learned a life lesson out of that. It's not really necessarily about what you're doing, but the attitude that you're bringing to it.
Exactly. And transparently, as a kid, I don't think I fully realized exactly what was happening. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I fully realized the change in my parents' jobs and what that toll might have been on them.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more later on in life, even in high school and past that, talking to my parents about their experience. And that's when I really realized the full magnitude, the sacrifices they made for us to be able to grow up in Canada.
Yeah. You mentioned that your parents didn't necessarily pressure you and your sister in any way, but seeing your parents go through that journey and later realizing that it was a tough transition, what did you take away from that?
One thing that is really interesting for me is even though the degrees my parents have didn't mean much in Canada, they still focused a ton on education. For
Mm-hmm.
them, going to college was never a topic of discussion. We just assumed, yes, that will be the path. It's not clear what college we'll be able to get into, but we'll always go to college. And for them, that is a source of stability that they still hold on to, thinking about, okay, education is something that you can work hard, you have the agency to go out and attain. And in Canada, it's also much more affordable and doable, regardless of your income background. And that's going to set you up on a really good foundation to be able to do everything else that you want to do.
Yeah, and education is one of the best ways to unlock opportunities for a lot of folks. So that focus on education makes a lot of sense. You touched a little bit the lesson that you learned being able to have a very hard work ethic towards whatever dreams you wanted to go after. Were there any seeded dreams that you had as a kid, or just some hypotheses of what you thought you would be when you were all grown up?
Yeah. So I still remember I loved and continue to love animals. That was my biggest passion as a kid. And I was
Mhm.
convinced I wanted to be a dolphin trainer. And then silly was told that dolphin trainers aren't really a job. So I was like, great, what's the closest? A marine biologist. And then I remember in grade 8, we went to a marine biology station in
Mhm.
northern Vancouver Island, which is very cold, very rainy. And it was a marine biology station that specifically studied algae and plankton. And I realized that it is not nearly as sexy as I thought to be a
Yeah.
marine biologist. I was like, wait, where are the whales?
Yeah.
Very important, but not my cup of tea. And then I pivoted to wanting to be a veterinarian. And both my older sister and I, our first jobs was working for our dog's veterinarian in his clinic, where
Mm.
we were student helpers, aka low wage janitors. All we did was clean. That's probably the only thing we were qualified to do. But for me, very quickly realized as well that being a veterinarian is extremely hard because the patients that you see are typically the sickest dogs or sickest cats that people have. And I also quickly realized that was not for me. So honestly, I think leaving high school, I didn't really have a clear view of what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
Even going into university, it was just very serendipitous where I ended up going. And I'm sure a lot of other immigrant kids can relate, where I didn't have a ton of support from my parents in terms of
Mhm.
navigation. And not that they weren't supportive of going to school, but they just were not familiar with how Canadian universities worked, what is admissions process,
Right.
what programs should you be applying to and trying to get into in order to go into certain careers. And I ended up applying to school called Queen's University, actually originally for their arts department because I wanted to study political science.
Mhm.
And because of the way applications work, basically it is so much more simple in Canada than the US. You can check multiple boxes per school for what programs you want to apply to.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I have one more checkbox left. And my cousin had gone to the same university probably like 6 or 7 years before me in engineering. He said, oh, their commerce program is really good. You should just check it because it's much harder to transfer into commerce than to transfer into
Mhm.
arts. So I was like,
Mhm.
great, I'll just check it off. It ended up being one of the best undergraduate business programs in Canada. And that's also
Mhm.
really ultimately what unlocked the opportunity for me to work at Bain because the reality in Canada is that there's basically two feeder schools that go into any of the big three consulting firms. And had
Yeah.
I not gone to that program, I don't think I would have had a chance to even interview at Bain.
Yeah. First of all, I can relate to you in terms of I also have immigrant parents. And so navigating the whole college admissions process was very much a self-driven thing, or you ask people that you know. And I feel like
Yeah.
it's different because if you don't have immigrant parents, your parents might be able to help you out and review your essays and tell you which schools you should apply to. So that definitely could be a struggle in and of itself. But it sounds like this cousin was very influential in you applying for this commerce program, which commerce in Canada, I imagine, is business and US speak for our non-Canadian audience out there. But that's awesome that this program happened to be one of the best in Canada. Did you find that you enjoyed it? Because you were originally planning to do poli sci or art. So once you got there, did you find that you actually enjoyed the subject of commerce?
Yeah. When I got there, I realized it was such a different world. It was really interesting where the program is about 300 students per year, very similar actually to my high school size.
Mm-hmm.
But it was at least 50% students that were coming from very elite, prestigious private schools in Toronto that
Mm-hmm.
somehow went to different all boys or all girls schools, but knew each other. And so there was this ecosystem that transfer from Toronto to the school that for a lot of us, especially ones coming from across the country, it was really weird to try to navigate because it felt like there's this almost existing social hierarchy that I just had no understanding of. And people were also very, very intense. I feel like I lucked into the program versus for other folks, they were much more intentional about it. And in first year, they wanted to be an investment banker, for example. While me, I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'll go work at a nonprofit.
I'm like, does an 18-year-old really want to be an investment banker for the rest of their lives? I'm not sure about that.
A very misguided 18-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was definitely very intimidating to be in an environment where it seemed like everyone else knew why they were there and what they were doing there.
And so did you feel like, oh, I'm in this program. I see there's this social hierarchy going on. I'm going to see it through until the end. Was that your thinking as you were progressing through your 4 years there?
Yeah. After the first year, I was really considering transferring out and transferring to a university in Vancouver just because I didn't really feel like I clicked with the program. I just felt like it wasn't an environment that I felt a sense of belonging, and it just felt so far from home. And I don't think I had ever been homesick before, but that was really the first time where I was like, I'm just in such a different environment. And the weather was also terrible. My school was in Kingston, Ontario, and it is absolutely beautiful in the summer when we are not there. It's actually where the Canadian rowing team trains. It's right by the river. It's really gorgeous. And then from probably like October to April, the majority of the time we're there, it's just snow. It's so cold and so bleak.
It sounds similar to my undergraduate experience.
I mean, not that far from Ithaca. So I had a hard time just overall because it was really different than my expectation of what school would be. And I actually imagined myself being in a city versus a small town where it was very much a college town because the university was there. And for me, this is both sometimes an asset, but also a liability where I have a really hard time calling it quits. I didn't want to admit that I couldn't do it. And so I just felt like I'm going to grit and bear through it. I'm going to get this bloody degree and it'll be fine. And I'm honestly, looking back, glad I did. And I don't think gritting it through every scenario is the right answer. But for me, every year just got better. I found my community, the people that I do connect with, people who shared similar values and similar aspirations for the impact that we wanted to make in the world. And it also afforded me really great opportunities where built into the program was very easy to study abroad. So I got to study abroad in Barcelona for 6 months. There's a ton of companies that come and recruit on campus. So I worked at Unilever during the summer between third and fourth year. And there was so much prep for doing consulting interviews. I had no idea what this whole case prep thing was. And then suddenly all my friends around me, as we were going back to school, they're like, oh, are you going to this case prep session? I'm like, what session? It was only because a lot of my friends are going. I was like, okay, I'll go and see what's up. And then be like, oh, consulting is a job. I'll just apply.
Right.
Once I knew what the process was, I put a lot of effort into it. But I think that's also why being in an environment where there are other people pursuing either similar opportunities or have high aspirations, it can be really valuable because these are all opportunities otherwise would not have even crossed my mind had my friends not been looking at them and telling me about them.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And if you're not in those quote unquote circles already where you're being exposed to these opportunities, it's really hard to know what's out there. So I can see where going to a college like this, even though in the first year you had those feelings of not belonging, it actually afforded you a wider scope of what's possible. And grit, I feel like that's just something you learn as an immigrant child. And it gets you far, I think, until it gets to a point where you're like, wait, I actually need to take a break sometimes. So there's a balance, but there is value to grit.
And I find it so interesting whether your parents are East Asian immigrants like our parents were, or immigrants from other areas, immigrant kids just share so much similarities that I find it so fascinating that regardless of the culture your parents might have been from, there is this focus on grit, agency, and trying to achieve. For me, a lot of it is thinking about my parents sacrificed so much for me that I want to make sure that whatever I do not only makes them proud, but also I can take care of them if anything happened.
Right. Yeah. It's not fully resting on my parents' ability to provide all the time, but it's actually like I might have
Yeah.
to take care of them at some point. And especially if they didn't come from a lot of means, there's definitely the sense of responsibility, both in pursuing those various opportunities and also in providing for our parents.
Yeah. Responsibility is a really good way to put it.
Yeah. So it didn't sound like you walked away in those years being like, I'm going to be an investment banker. And sounded like you and your friends were focused on making an impact. So do you think while you were there, you seeded this desire to make an impact at some point in your career?
Yeah. I have always felt like I needed to feel connected with the work that I do and wanting to make sure that there is some sort of positive impact in the world,
Hmm.
not necessarily in the nonprofit world or social sector, but that it just has a true reason for being. Because in my mind, there's so many different ways that we can spend our energies. Being able to do something that has a positive impact just feels so much more worthwhile.
Yeah, 100%. There's a purpose behind the work that you're doing. That was really great to hear about your childhood and also your desire to make this impact. And obviously, we can see how you're making an impact in your current business that you're running today. So now I'd love to transition to just the journey of how you ended up starting this business. But before you embarked with 28 Health, what were some of the experiences leading up to that you think led you to co-founding that company?
Yeah. So after college, I worked at Bain Toronto for 3 years. And after that, I felt like I really appreciated the accelerated learning. I really appreciated the culture and community, but I also felt like I was so far from the impact where anytime you're consulting, particularly with clients, you're at least one step removed. And depending on the work you're doing, you might be even further removed from the end beneficiaries or people that it
Mm-hmm.
impacts. So I want to go somewhere a little bit smaller. And so I ended up working at a venture studio in New York. Initially, it was to lead a dietitian telemedicine platform, which is really interesting because this is back in 2014, still nascent days of telemedicine.
Mm-hmm.
And what we very quickly learned was that reimbursement from insurance is an incredibly important part of affordability for people, which ultimately drives accessibility. And our initial hypothesis was if we were able to bring dietitians online, we can reduce overhead costs. So if people had to pay out of pocket, it could be lower. That being said, the lowest we could get it to and really convince dietitians to still make it worthwhile for them is probably about $50 to $60 per session for 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, dietitians actually recommend you meet with them on a weekly basis for 60 minutes. So automatically, just based on the economic model, you're pricing a lot of people out.
Yeah.
And we then looked at coverage from insurance, but typically insurance only covers 3 sessions per year for very specific populations.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, we quickly realized that in order to build something within the US healthcare system, there needs to be really clear source of funds that may not be coming from the end users, in this case, the patients, to truly make something accessible. Because I was a venture studio, we ended up shutting down that business. And then I went on to lead a direct consumer skincare startup, Onomie.
So this dietitian telemedicine business was at a venture studio. Tell us about what does that mean to be at a venture studio?
A venture studio is typically an organization that brings in different operators with different sets of skills. We had software engineers, designers, product managers, marketers, and it is an organization that's focused on incubating ideas and then growing and potentially spinning out ideas that are really successful.
Mm-hmm.
So the good part about being at a venture studio is that there is less risk than going out solo or with a co-founder to create your own business because the financial backing for the venture studio was already there.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than going out to fundraise from a lot of different investors, we just had to be able to demonstrate and justify the investment to the head of the venture studio.
Got it. So it's an incubator that allows different businesses to get started and then to grow and use the resources from that venture studio to work on the business. And it sounds like for this dietitian telemedicine business, the numbers just weren't working out to be able to give an affordable service for the patients that needed it.
Exactly. And the other piece that is tricky is dietitians can provide a lot of expert knowledge and can provide a lot of guidance in terms of helping someone think about what they should be eating as well as their food behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
However, it doesn't necessarily help you change behaviors in real time when you actually need it. So that was another insight that we landed on. There is a level of support from connecting with the dietitian, but there's still something missing that really helps you to change your behavior day to day.
Yeah, to make their advice actionable. That's hard to do right on the spot.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And for example, when we interviewed some of our early users, we interviewed someone that had rated their dietitian really highly, had very positive reviews, but did not come back after a few sessions. And we're like, okay, why is that?
Yeah.
And what they told us was that, oh, I love my dietitian. She was so great. Like she gave me such good advice. But the last few weeks have been so busy. I haven't had a chance to actually implement or try out anything she told me. And I don't want to meet with her again until I've been able to try something out. That's just a good example of people can have the best intentions, but it's not necessarily creating the tools for them to take action.
Yeah. And I feel like with a lot of dietitians, it's on the patient to be like, I'm actually going to take ownership of this and make those adjustments to my life. And it's hard to make
Yeah.
those types of behavioral adjustments. So then this business ended up not working out. And I guess you were also exposed to some of the differences in the US healthcare system versus the Canadian healthcare system.
Yeah. That was my first time diving into the US healthcare system, both as a business person trying to build a business in healthcare, but also as a patient. I was also trying to figure out what this whole in-network, copay, like what any of those words meant, because for better or worse, when you go see a doctor in Canada, you just walk into any clinic, give them your health card, and that's it.
Sounds nice.
I mean, there's usually really long lines, so it has its own set of issues, but it is much easier to navigate.
Mm-hmm. So then you ended up pivoting to a skincare company.
Yeah. So it was a skincare company also within the venture studio where when I saw we weren't really getting anywhere with the dietitian platform, I had recommended to the head of the venture studio to shut down the business and basically use the resources that we had on other brands that we were spinning up. And the skincare brand was one that we were spinning up at that time. And serendipitously, I was able to have the opportunity to lead it.
And what was a key takeaway or learning from that time that you think has contributed to your work in your current business?
Yeah. One thing that is so prevalent in beauty is this consumer centric approach where you get really deep in your understanding who your users are. We did user visits where we visited their home to see what products they had on their top shelf, what were their go-to skincare regimen. And this is so different than the way patient experiences are built in healthcare, where because there are so many different stakeholders with different incentives within the healthcare system, the patient experience is often the last piece that's actually thought about versus really building the healthcare delivery experience for patient accessibility.
Yeah. And I feel like any person in the US can feel that friction just from going through the system themselves. So what happened after you were working on that skincare company?
Yeah. So I was at the venture studio overall for about 3 years. And by the end of it, I just felt really burnt out. I really just needed a break. While I learned a ton working in beauty, I love that our consumers were so delighted by our products. I still felt like there was something missing where beauty can be really fun, but for me personally, it was a nice to have and not a need to have. And I saw that it takes the same amount of blood, sweat, and tears to build a business from 0 to 1, whether that is in skincare or healthcare. And so for me, I wanted to take some time to reflect and really think about how do I want to personally spend my time and energy.
Yeah. It sounds like that impact piece might have been from the skincare company that you were working on.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what led you to business school?
Yeah, I honestly approached business school like this is the most expensive adult vacation I'm gonna I'm gonna do. But honestly, there was one point working at the venture studio where I just felt so overwhelmed. I couldn't even fathom thinking about what I would want to do next. I
Yeah.
literally felt like I had zero mind share for anything else.
Yeah.
And it seemed like business school in some ways was a no-brainer from a work and career opportunity perspective.
Sure.
Obviously, it is a large investment,
Mhm.
but it didn't feel like it would necessarily be a setback to my career by
Right.
taking this time to go to business school.
Right. And it sounds like you were also giving yourself this mental space to reflect on the work that you've done so far and to figure out what you wanted to do next, which I think is
Yeah.
what a lot of people use business school for. Because by that time, you've been working for 5 or more years typically. And we've all been just trying things out at that point. And business school is a
Yeah.
great time to have some space to figure out what is it that I intentionally want to do. But I will say, as one of your classmates in business school, that I did not see you chill and take it easy. Tell me
I don't think
about,
anyone would ever describe me as a chill person.
can you tell us about how you ended up starting 28 Health while you were at business school?
Yeah, I actually had zero intentions of starting a business while at business school, which I do think some folks did have that mindset going in, which makes a ton of sense where you're in an ecosystem with a lot of resources, whether it's in the business school itself or all the different schools within that university. And you
Mhm.
have the time to be able to learn, to build, to try in a very safe way.
Right.
And for me, because I had just come from a startup environment, I felt like I'm good. I've tried building a business from 0 to 1 twice already. It was very tiring. I'm here to do the travels and the
Yeah.
social aspects, but I was connected with my co-founder, Bruno, through one of our classmates, Pablo. And Pablo and my co-founder, Bruno, had worked at the Gates Foundation together. And Bruno had actually seen reproductive health telemedicine startups in Kenya and Rwanda during his time at Gates and saw the
Mhm.
potential for telemedicine to overcome issues of lack of infrastructure and issues of stigma by using telemedicine.
Mhm.
So he was really interested in thinking about how do we take those similar learnings and apply it to low resource communities in the US.
Mhm.
And I was really excited by the idea. And Bruno doesn't have a background in startups, hadn't built a company previously. So he was also looking to partner someone that had that experience and knew what to do in the 0 to 1 phase.
Got it.
And I will say, even though I was really excited by the idea, I was still hesitant about the idea of jumping into the deep end, becoming a co founder, and building a business from scratch.
If we back up to your approach to business school and trying to take it chill, how are you connected with someone who had this amazing idea to even get there? Was it because they were looking for someone with co-founding experience and you happened to be that person? Was it just a light, casual meetup? How did that meeting moment happen?
Yeah, so Bruno had been reaching out to his network, which included Pablo, to try to find folks to talk to just learn about how do you build a consumer business. And so Pablo thought like, oh, Amy would be great to talk to. So
Yeah.
it started out, I was like a very casual phone call where he was
Yeah.
telling me about the idea. I was giving him advice on what I did to really test out ideas in a very early stage. What are really key things to think about? What are some metrics that you should be measuring?
Mhm.
And I just got so excited about the idea. After the call, I proceeded to send him a 5-page email with, hey, this is what I think you need to do. This is the part of the business plan that it's very worthwhile to think about in the beginning, such as the economic model, particularly in
Yeah.
healthcare, and really think about how reimbursement plays into a part of this, especially if we want to focus on underserved communities, recognizing these individuals don't have a high ability to pay out of pocket themselves. So we really need to leverage reimbursement from insurance, namely Medicaid, to make these services accessible. And I think for Bruno seeing this, he's like, okay, this is someone who clearly has been giving this some more thought and
Yeah.
has some of the experiences I'm looking for, and folded from there.
And what gave you the confidence to be like, okay, I'm actually going to commit to this and do this full time?
Yeah, that's a great question. For the business itself, we spent the first 3 to 5 months doing a really deep dive on the market to try and get really smart on understanding what is women's health in the US? What are the different conditions and treatments? And looking at it both from a macro market side and then looking at it from a patient side. So we did probably 200 user interviews before we built the business to really understand what are the pain points that underserved women face when they're trying to access healthcare. And
Mm-hmm.
that really helped me to build conviction that one, what we're building is something that's needed. Two, it is possible for us to build something that's differentiated. And three, this is a business that I think deserves to exist because it has such an important impact that we could potentially make.
Yeah, in terms of that discovery phase and having all those 200 plus user interviews, it seems like you really took the learnings from that skincare company and going into people's homes, seeing how they use their skincare, and took the same approach in really building confidence to get this business started.
I think it's so important to take a user-centric approach, regardless of what you're building, whether it's a B2B or B2C business.
And I can see that in and of itself leading to a differentiated product in the US healthcare system, where, as you said, the landscape is not a patient first approach. So, what were some of the first steps you both took to actually get this business off the ground?
Yeah. So tactically, we incorporated the business in Delaware, like all startups do. And we put together a lovely deck because my co-founder used to work at BCG. So we're both ex-consultants and really great at making slides and models. I would say the other piece that we did before we went out and started fundraising is to try to find real world evidence that there is truly a need. So
Mhm.
on top of the interviews that we did, we also set up a really simple landing page that explained what we were trying to do and asked individuals to sign up for a mailing list if they were interested in our services. Obviously, we couldn't actually have them sign up because we didn't have anything else beyond the landing page built.
Mhm.
But it was a really good way to be able to actually demonstrate real interest from strangers that are not talking to us face to face, even though a lot of the folks we interviewed aren't people with personal connections. I think when you actually see user behavior in the natural environment of where you're creating that product, that is so
Mhm.
much more meaningful. And I do think that's a really important step where, as much as Bruno and I can do research into this market and think this is your great idea, it doesn't matter if the people we're trying to serve doesn't think it's a great idea.
Right,
So
right.
actually putting something out in the world and getting real, potentially critical feedback is really
Yeah.
important as well.
It sounds like a great way to test in the market and be able to actually bring that as evidence that this is something that's needed.
Mhm.
What were some of the initial wins and challenges that you faced as you were starting to operationalize the business?
Yeah, I don't think I quite realized being in reproductive health and starting with the reproductive health, what are the policy challenges that would arise? So, when we started, we decided to launch with birth control first for a couple different reasons. One being that there is still a lot of folks, there's 20 million folks in the US that live in contraceptive deserts. So, there was a real need that we wanted to address. The other piece is from a business perspective. People typically stay on birth control for many, many years in their life. So it would actually be an easier product to start with because inherently within the treatment itself, there is longer retention. So
Mhm.
provided we do the initial onboarding well, we should be able to retain users as
Mhm.
long as we also provide continuous service that's seamless. However, when we first started in 2018, we actually launched with one payment processor. And then that payment processor decided that we were too risky of a business and pulled us off their platform 2 weeks after launch. So
Whoa.
originally, we actually launched October of 2018 and then relaunched at the very end of December 2018 because we then needed to go and figure out how do we work with additional payment processors that are willing to take this level of risk.
Yeah.
Even though I don't necessarily think a birth control business is risky, but just because of the category we were in, it was deemed as riskier. And
Mhm.
I have so many anecdotes of how working in reproductive health can be viewed as risky or make our business flagged across different vendors. So even beyond payment processors, for example, on Instagram, our account was deactivated because Instagram said that we were posting nudity. And when we went through with them to figure out exactly what we're posting that was not okay, it ended up being an illustration that is like an artistic rendition, not like a drawing that you would find in a medical textbook of the female anatomy and specifically the inside. So it was a picture of ovaries with fallopian tubes and then the uterus.
Mm-hmm.
And that was flagged as nudity and got our entire account deactivated. And obviously, there's so many things wrong with that. But I think that's just
Yeah.
like an example of unexpected challenges that arose working in reproductive health.
Right. I've seen your Instagram posts in the past, and I only remember seeing illustrations. So I was surprised when you said nudity and the payment processor. Usually, payment processors, it's a tool. And so I'm also surprised that they made that judgment call. What do you think about reproductive health that is catching all these flags? Like, is there a stigma around it?
There's definitely a stigma around it. And I think in the US, a lot more so than Canada, there's also a lot of politicization of it as
Right.
well. And so, even though, for example, birth control, oral contraceptives have been approved by the FDA for 5 decades, there's a lot of clinical research as well as real world evidence to show that it is a very low risk, highly effective treatment.
Mm-hmm.
However, despite the amount of medical evidence, there is still this stigma. And there's also a lot of myths that are perpetuated out there about birth control.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, when companies do their own internal risk assessments, they flag it as a riskier category.
That's so interesting because I wonder if the same business was somewhere else where it's less politicized and more seen as like a objective health issue, if they would have made the same judgment call. So I could see how that introduced a lot of variables that you didn't expect. So it sounds like that must have been really tough. What were some wins as you've seen your business grow? Like, what are some moments that you're really proud of now that you've been working on this business?
Overall, I'm incredibly proud of the impact we've been able to make. We've served over 60,000 users. The majority of our users are Medicaid recipients. Also, the majority identifies BIPOC.
Mm-hmm.
We've been able to deliver really great service with a very high NPS, and being someone who is very user centric, that is
Yeah.
important to me, that we're creating a really inclusive experience that also makes people feel like they're taken care of. One of the really common themes we heard from user interviews was that, particularly for folks who are Medicaid recipients, they had so many experiences of being turned away from clinics, feeling disrespected or treated as second class citizens. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we really want to make sure they never felt at 28. So, all these things I'm really proud of. And it's really because of our team. And the team is also another piece that I just feel so grateful for. I feel so lucky that there's such a smart, capable, and passionate group of folks that decided to take a chance with us to build 28 and be on this journey to fulfill our mission. And that's something that I do not take for granted, that these are folks that could go work anywhere. And I honestly feel very lucky that they're here.
That's awesome. I feel like people are everything in terms of culture, in terms of the work that you're able to get done. So that's really awesome to hear. I see themes about when you're growing up, you really learn from your parents that it's about having pride over the work that you're doing. And also the fact that your parents were also immigrant parents. And now you're bringing that same level of respect to your patients and being targeted towards the BIPOC community. So that must feel really awesome for you in terms of making an impact and seeing that come into fruition, given you are also BIPOC yourself. So what has that been like serving this community?
Yeah. I think there's a couple components of it where there's elements that I can be more empathetic about because I have certain parts of lived experiences that
Mm-hmm.
might resonate with the community that we serve. I also recognize that I grew up in Canada, which is still a very different environment than growing up in the US. And the other piece as well is that there is much larger health disparities for Latinx women and Black women than there are for Asian women for a
Mm-hmm.
variety of reasons, including systemic racism within the healthcare system itself. And so for me, it is being able to continue to be empathetic, but also recognizing that there's so much more that I need to do to educate myself and making sure that I continue to speak with our users. I continue to stay engaged in the community more broadly to better understand how we can truly create an inclusive environment for all the BIPOC women that we serve.
And where would you say the business is now? What are you focused on?
So we're really excited to continue to expand the healthcare offerings that we have. our vision is to be the digital healthcare home for underserved women, supporting them from menstruation, pregnancy, all the way up to menopause one day. So this year specifically, we're really focused on building out additional perinatal offerings. So today we offer prenatal vitamins, but some of the things we'll be building include preconception consults as well as postpartum depression screening.
Awesome. That's really great to hear about the ancillary services that you guys are expanding into. Okay, so now that we've chatted about your business, I'd like to take some time to hear about your reflections on your journey so far. So, what are some top of mind reflections that come up as you look back on your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah. So I recently was at a summit for female founders, and a really common theme was around enjoying the ride. And that is something that I'm reflecting on and really trying to hold myself accountable for one, celebrating the wins a lot more, because it's very easy to be like, great, check, this is done, move on to the next, instead of
Yeah,
taking even a moment to really think, wow, I can't believe we collectively did this together. This is
right.
very impactful, and we should be able to feel a sense of joy from that. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece, reflecting backwards on my time at 28, is also thinking about, yes, there's a lot of hardships to building startups, but there's so many things that are also incredibly gratifying. There are so many things I've learned about myself and being able to find joy in those moments as well.
Yeah, I could see it serving as a way for personal growth too, because you're working so hard with a tight team on a very mission driven organization. So I could see how that contributes to your own growth as well. And as you're leading this business and you continue to lead this business, are there any doubts that come to mind that are old or new? And if so, then how do you address those doubts?
Constantly, there are doubts. I very much feel imposter syndrome. And I still feel like every room I enter, everyone is smarter than me and know more than me. And that's something I continuously have to catch myself on and remind myself that, yes, like all those folks would be smarter than me, but I've spent my time in the last 5 years dedicated to this specific part of the healthcare system,
Hmm.
dedicated to helping this specific community. So there are things that I know that these other folks might not because I'm necessarily smarter than them, but because I've just spent the time and done the work. And that also helps me feel more prepared and more confident showing up in different settings.
Yeah. Challenging some of the negative thoughts that could come up and also pointing to the evidence of your experience. I feel like
Yeah.
that's really helpful whenever you're faced with those doubts. And last question, how do you think that you personally have grown through these experiences and what have been some key learnings?
I think I have grown so much throughout this experience, because building a startup, you see an accelerated path of how a company grows. And it's so different at every stage, whether it's fundraising, investor management, partnership building, team management.
Mhm.
And I'm constantly learning. For me, specifically, what I'm working on now is trying to find a balance of being clear and direct while being kind. And
Mhm.
the reason why I say that is because both a piece in my personal life that has also been a part of my professional life was this desire for people to like me. And a big part of it is, how do I be nice to everyone? And the role of being a founder, the role of being an executive, or the role of being a manager is sometimes you have to make decisions that people aren't going to like.
Yeah.
They can be valid decisions, and you can try and handle the process with as much empathy and kindness as possible. But at the end of the day, like, you can't control how other people feel. And
Yeah.
building a business based on wanting to be liked is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I'm currently trying to figure out the right balance for, because I also hold myself to a very high bar, and I would not want to use same level of criticism that I have for myself for those around me.
Mhm. Yeah, I've heard something like clear is kind, and there's specific diction being used because it's not like clear is nice. To be clear is to be kind, and to be kind is to be compassionate, be honest, all these things that you're saying. But comparing that to being nice, which I've also suffered from people pleasing, but being nice is almost like you're not able to say the things that you're actually thinking and that are really in your mind and in your heart because you're worried about how it will impact this other person.
And I think especially when you're a people manager, you might not want to provide a piece of constructive feedback because you're worried about hurting their feelings.
Right.
But that also means you're taking that learning opportunity away from them and also withholding a really important piece of information where they don't know that there's actually something they're doing that's not great because you never told them and they have no opportunity to improve. Obviously, way easier said than done.
Yeah. Anything else in this section that you want to touch on?
I think the other piece I'll say as a founder is that first, you're going to receive so many unsolicited advice. Second, you're going to hear no way more often than you'll hear yes. But the former, it's starting to build your own judgment and really trusting your instincts around, okay, what feedback is helpful for me and what feedback am I going to leave on the table?
Yeah.
I think generally people have really good intent, but they also have a different set of perspective and experience that may or may not actually be relevant to the situations that you're currently in. And then with the second piece, for me personally, I don't think I'm someone who has a particularly thick skin, but it is very much a lesson in resilience where you have to do a bunch of back-to-back fundraising calls. And you do one where it goes not so great. You might hear some negative feedback. You log off. You take a minute to just close your eyes and breathe.
Yeah.
Reset and then do it all over again. And I will say there is something very freeing once you get to the point of like, okay, this got no, I'm just going to brush it off and move on. And sometimes I can feel that. Sometimes I still take it very deeply, but it is something that I think is unavoidable. Then ultimately, I think can help you grow, but learn in the school of hard knocks type of growth.
Because you're working on this business that literally is your blood, sweat, and tears. So to hear someone say no, I could imagine how that can feel just not great. Going through all these exercises and learning how to take those no's, I feel like that is the school of entrepreneurship. As someone said, you have to scale yourself if you want to scale your business. So it really feels like there's a lot of learning opportunity. Well, Amy, thanks so much for being with us today. So if people want to learn more about 28 Health, where can they go?
Yeah, so they can come to our website, which is 28health.com, or follow us on social. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. Not yet TikTok because we are too old. But if you know of someone who is interested in building TikTok for a women's health company, also please come our way. The other piece is we really rely on word of mouth for women in need to hear about the services that we offer. So if you know of someone who is interested in birth control, herpes treatment, prenatal vitamins, or other women's health services, please direct them to 28 Health. With every delivery that we make, we donate 2% of our revenues to two national nonprofits that are advancing access for uninsured individuals. So whether you have commercial insurance, Medicaid, or you're paying out of pocket, you can use 28, and you'll also then help additional women in need.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being with us. It was so great to speak to you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks for tuning in to an episode of Be Queens. Please leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. And stay tuned for the next one.